Welcome back, everyone, to Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrer, co-produced by Alan Brewer. Chuck and I are recording this show on Election Day here in the United States, November 5th, 2024. It is day 986 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. Chuck and I are going to cover a lot of maps today. Talk about just about every yard and meter of the zero line we can, because it is so hot on the zero line right now, Chuck.
It is lots going on, some Russian gains in places that you would probably predict, and some surprisingly successful Ukrainian counterattacks, which are ongoing and significant. So we'll be happy to report those as well.
Well, the number of engagements, which is just one way to measure the tempo of attacks on the zero line, reached an all-time high for a single day this year, perhaps since the beginning of the war, well over 200. I think it was 230 plus, just on a, and this is reported by Ragnar Goodmanson, who tracks this. I mean, people should take a look at his statistics every single day. He does a great job. It's a 34% increase. That kind of data speaks for itself, doesn't it?
It does, and it used to be the median number of Russian casualties a day were a couple of hundred. Then 400 or 500 became kind of the median number. But now we are well over 1,000 Russian casualties a day. And in fact, yesterday they lost 1,260 people. They lost 15 tanks, 43 armored vehicles, 29 artillery tubes, 2 air defense systems, and 29 UAVs were shot down. That of course tells us about the scope of the conflict, but it also shows me that the harder the Russians try, the greater their losses. And you want to balance those kind of reports in a different way. If your headquarters wants to hear that you're attacking better and losing fewer people and equipment, but it doesn't happen for the Russians.
But the Russians have the mass. They have the superiority both in firepower and manpower in order to keep grinding forward almost anywhere.
Yep. Where they put their effort, there are places where they are advancing, but we will get down to Pokrovsk, the Donetsk area, both north and south, and we'll see that the Russians have taken a lot of ground there, but they're now having a lot of trouble at the zero line. You know, and when you zoom into these maps, where I put the battle icons is indicative of how well things are going. Unfortunately, the battle icons take up often more room than you can see. But when we get down there to Donetsk, look, you can tell by where the blue battle icon means a successful Ukrainian defense or an attack that is more than 1 kilometer in the zero line. So there are places where the Russians are actually losing ground now. Not surprising in a place where they have plowed in so many bodies. It doesn't surprise me. But the fighting is really tough. And there are casualties, of course, on both sides.
And I think that we should go right to the maps at the top of this show, Chuck, starting in Kupiansk. And Kupiansk is not even the hottest place on the zero line, but here is a place where Russia is having some success, again, attempting this swing around Kupiansk to the north.
Yeah, so if you are getting a look at this map, it's 1640 UTC 5 November. Uh, West of Sinkivka, the Russians were able to maneuver forces into that band of forest, and are attacking. Uh, they are attacking south and west towards the P79 highway. We say P79, and it's actually an R79. That is the Cyrillic letter for R, actually. So Route 79. Uh, if you are zoomed into that battle map, you'll see I've got the contact line across the Oskil River. That goes back and forth, but I am assessing the Russians as actually having crossed the stream up there. And remember, if you're going to operate on the other side of a water course, whether it's a canal, a California irrigation ditch, anything that slows down your truck or stops it, if you're going to fight on the other side of that obstacle, you've got to maintain supply and reinforcement of those troops. Uh, Given the terrain in that sector, again, this is west of Sinkivka, you can see the contour lines letting the Russians advance across that river there. Uh, you're inviting them to stick their head into the buzzsaw, right? I couldn't think of a better place to let them advance so that they will have a river at their back, flat terrain, overlooked by Ukrainians who are putting plunging fire down on the enemy.
Really, here north of Kupiansk, Russia would need to succeed in driving all the way to Route 79. The hilly terrain, overland, it just is not going to be easy for Russia to traverse in any way.
Right. And cutting the, Route 79, okay, I'm not sure how good that's going to do. The principal supply route for Kupiansk is the H-26, which comes from the west. Um, there are gains and there is terrain you want to gain and terrain that is worth you expending material and manpower. But so often you see the Russians, they succeed where they can. And sometimes it just isn't cost effective. And we'll talk later in the map a place where I see perhaps the Ukrainians might not want to defend it at all because the terrain is tactically moot, right? There's some terrain that you might as well give it to the enemy. Who cares? I mean, if he wants to occupy a flat valley surrounded by your high ground, then man, let him have it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let him have it for as long as he can stay there, which wouldn't be very long. A lot of glide bomb attacks here by the Russians. It strikes me that not aimed at the center of Kupiansk, but rather seemingly aimed at Ukrainian troop concentrations or Ukrainian maneuvers. Interesting.
Yeah, Alan, you're getting pretty good at reading a battle map. A lot of these airstrikes, the Russians may not always address the right objectives in terms of maneuver warfare, but they almost always hit what they're aiming at with their glide bombs. Mixed into that are legitimate targets for Russians, which are apartment buildings, uh, bombshell, whatever they can hit to hit the civilians. But in a lot of these cases, I see these strike icons going down at places I would think are very likely Ukrainian assembly points. Podoloy, there just to the east of downtown Kupiansk. That's an obvious point that Ukrainian forces would be likely to concentrate. Likewise, south of the city, in the bands of forests there, previous location of an attempted Russian breakthrough to the Oskil River. So you can, unfortunately, I don't very often get geolocated data for Ukrainian airstrikes. But there was a MiG 29 prowling around the other day with French Hammer glide bombs. Uh, I only can put them up when I know what they're shooting at. So and we get tape like that. I don't know, once a week, maybe less.
Yeah, and there were so few Ukrainian airstrikes in any event.
Yeah,
Russia really has command of the air, especially in this area, when you come right down to it.
yeah,
Very hard pressed here in Kupiansk, and yet the Ukrainians still have very good defensive positions and defensive terrain to inflict as great a toll on Russians as possible.
yeah, absolutely. And Kupiansk, unlike Bakhmut, unlike Pokrovsk, Kupiansk is a legitimate. It has legitimate tactical uh, validity. It's a worthwhile place for the Russians to capture. But just Alan, just as you've said, the broken terrain to the north, the forests, the broken terrain and watercourses to the east, and even the heavy bands of forest and swamp to the south, and the topography, the urban topography, where you've got a settlement on one side of the Oskil, and then the city of Kupiansk is kind of built on a hill, a bit like San Francisco. It's a pretty these roads are pretty steep going uphill, and the buildings, and that of course gives them plunging fire on almost all avenues of approach. So this is going to be a tough nut to crack. And this is a place to watch. This is a focal point, not the focal point, but a focal point of Russian effort in the east.
And one would have to assume, not here in Kupiansk, but when we get down to Pokrovsk and Kurakova, uh, Ukraine is making a decision of where to counterattack. And it's not in Kupiansk right now. And I think that the Ukrainian commanders must have such difficult decisions to make about troop deployment. Where can they hold on with the troops they have in place? Where do they need reinforcements? And with sufficient reinforcements, can they counterattack against the Russians? It's just got to be so difficult for General Syrski in particular. It's his final say.
Well, he's got two problems, and both of them are also are predicate on the United States. He can't put together an offensive operation because he cannot depend on the United States, which following through with its promises, not just what he hopes to get. We're not sending what we said we're going to send him. People always say, well, why aren't the Ukrainians attacking? Because they can't count on the United States. They have a strategic reserve of ammunition, material, missiles, etc. They have to husband those so carefully that if you are a frontline infantry, platoon leader, you call for fire every day. You're just, as a Ukrainian, you're not going to get it. And I mean, I've spoken a lot about that. I have been in that position myself many times, and it's extraordinarily, well, let's just say it's very frustrating.
I can imagine how frustrating it is. I mean, you need artillery support and you can't get it. The other thing about Kupiansk that strikes me again. There's no place on the zero line, by the way, where Russia does not have superiority. They might have greatest superiority in Crimea. They might have greatest superiority in Pokrovsk. I'm not sure exactly where they have the greatest superiority over Ukrainian forces, but they certainly have it here in Kupiansk. Again, the strain on the defensive force having to meet daily assaults of that are continuous. There is no rest. And although the Russians may wait for daylight to launch their attack, it's always more than one attack. It's grind forward, fall back, grind forward, fall back, grind forward, fall back. Ukrainians have to meet every single one of these assaults.
Yeah, I put a long post up a couple of days ago, and it dealt with, you know, what are the why isn't Russia succeeding? Right, there are all these attacks all over the zero line. When you if you go to the live view map and you pull it way up, I mean, then you see these nodes of Russian efforts because the contact reports are grouped. And by the way, if please do go to live view map. When you drill into their maps, they'll show you the house where a battle was focused on. They will, they don't put their contact reports down willy nilly. They're within 50 meters of where the contact actually occurred. Uh, you know, there are some good things about these Russian attacks, right? They always occur in daylight because they're incapable of operating at night. They come on predictable axes of attack. They generally don't attack in a new place. They generally keep trying where they're trying. And that could be because they don't have people who can read maps. As you approach the zero line from the Russian side, there are things you can use like engineer tape, which is just like this big canvas strip. And you tie it to a tree and you go from tree to tree to tree to tree up to where your jumping off point is, because these guys can't navigate. And once you put the engineer tape up there and you have this funnel, they just keep attacking there. So that's good. If you're going to have to do a day's fighting, all things being equal, and they're not, it's much easier to sit in your foxhole, lick your front sight, and wait for these guys to show up. And you're not going to get surprised because your drones have caught them at the concentration point, at the jumping off point. You know when they're rolling. You know what the force package is. You know when it's going to arrive. You're warming your drones up and you're getting them all in the air. So, this becomes a predictable pattern, right? And the Russians have not been able to achieve tactical surprise. I don't know, 18, 20 months. You and I have not been surprised by, holy cow, we didn't see this coming. It just hasn't happened in this war.
Yeah, except by the Ukrainians.
Except by the Ukrainians, absolutely. Yeah, we take that back.
I saw an interesting video the just yesterday or earlier today of a trench battle. So it's a very concentrated video, again, from a drone's perspective. And just an aside, so much of this war is covered in detail from the drone's perspective. I think that we are seeing more of this war unfold before our eyes than we have seen of any war fought to date. And it's all thanks to drones in the air, both Ukrainian and Russian drones in the air. The Russian drones record war crimes, and the Ukrainian drones record maneuver. It's successful and unsuccessful, but this showed a very successful coordination. That's the key. Coordination of Ukrainian infantry, outnumbered, by the way, by Russians, and drones, Ukrainian drones. Without those drones, the Ukrainian infantry in the trench would have had to break contact and fall back. Because I don't know if there are so many videos out there. We don't always see the same ones, but the Ukrainians do seem superior in coordinating infantry with drones, maybe because they lack artillery. I don't know.
Well, it's there's an entirely new dimension to ground maneuver warfare now. I mean, in my day, if I had a drone, it was a Predator at 30,000 feet, and it had maybe 4 Hellfires. That was it. It cost a gazillion bucks, and it was so classified we weren't supposed to use it. Now every infantry squad has got a drone operator, and in fact, you won't survive on the battlefield unless you have one. Of course, we see all of this activity because Ukrainian drones never operate alone. There are several different kinds. We've talked about the upside down wedding cake with the high endurance drones on top, medium endurance below them, and tactical short range FPV drones are the real piranhas, but they're overseen by hammerhead sharks and white sharks up the food chain. I did a this week's episode, or last week's episode actually, of Point of Impact on the Kyiv Post. I went through not the entire catalog of Ukrainian drones, but I went through maybe 15 or 20 drone systems and talked about what they can do, how long their endurance are. And there are Ukrainian drones that have a 22-hour combat endurance.
Wow.
So you're going to run out of pilots before that drone runs out of fuel. And these are used as persistent electronics warfare platforms or persistent intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. But they can also be sent, if you've got a 22-hour flight endurance, you can definitely send that deep into Russia, and they do.
Well, the thing that struck me about this video, again on the battlefield, and it didn't say exactly where. My guess is it wasn't in Kupiansk. It was probably down in Pokrovsk. But the Ukrainians waited for the arrival of the drones. The drones arrived like the cavalry. They were clearly waiting for assistance from the drones. These were attack drones. They were dropping grenades on the advancing Russian soldiers, again, which outnumbered the Ukrainians. And the drones took care of them. And then the Ukrainians advanced and took care of the rest of the Russians. So this coordination, very, very effective and certainly needed by Ukrainian infantry units.
Well, indefinitely, because for all intents and purposes, and I'm not casting aspersions on the brave pilots flying for Ukraine, but Ukraine basically doesn't have an air force, right? And certainly vis-a-vis the Russian air force. So in lieu of close air support, Ukraine has invented an entirely new weapon, right? The first-person drone, the bomber drones. We have all watched those videos, and it is astounding to watch the accuracy. These guys can drop a mortar round into an open hatch. Look, that's a talent.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's amazing what these, especially the Ukrainian drone operators, can do. Just amazing. It also means that from these Ukrainian units on the zero line and the drone operators somewhere in the rear, that they have good, secure communication. And I guess there's probably someone in the rear watching the very same video that they eventually post, but they're seeing this fight unfold in real time.
well, there's some pro-Ukraine behaviors that the Russians keep conducting, right? I keep seeing attacks by Russians in column, perpendicular to the zero line, so that you're a Russian, you're approaching in column, only one of your vehicles can fire. They're all bumper to bumper, but everything up here can converge its fire on the approaching Russians. They do it again and again and again. There is also a density of defensive minefields in front of the Ukrainian positions, right? They are heavily mined. And I say minefield because the Ukrainians know where their mines are. You see a lot of Russian vehicles blowing up. And frankly, I'd say at least a third of them are striking their own mines, which have been distributed helter skelter and willy nilly, and no one knows where they are. I mean, that's not a minefield. That's a toxic waste dump, right? So the Russians, they pay for it. They pay for it. So, and we want all of these things to continue. Our Russian listening guests, please keep this up. It's working for us.
And it will continue to work. Well, should we move from Kupiansk to Kremenchuk?
Absolutely. We've got two maps of Kremina here. If I could find my other one.
And they're great. They're two great maps for everyone watching and listening because their scales are so different. So you have a very large scale map. It gives you a view of the pretty much everything that you want to see around Kremina, between Kremina and Liman, and then a very good concentrated small scale map that focuses on the Zarabets reservoir, which is a significant obstacle to Russians. Once again, they've reached it, but I don't know how much farther they're going to go.
Yeah, if you're looking at the larger map, you can see Russian points of attack, and they are both north of the Zarabets reservoir, focused on the south end of the reservoir, and that is, in order to get to the 0528 highway, which heads to Liman. And there is contact also within the Zarabets forestry, contact around Bilio Horvika. And those are the sort of usual brush fire points that have been going on in the Kremenna battlefield. And I'll just tell everybody, I didn't even have the other map open. We've been covering this so long. I know every little town on there. But the close-in map that we put together here of the Zarabets reservoir, I did this because we're likely to see some changes in the zero line regarding the Zarabets River. So if you are looking now at that blown up map, which is the 1750 UTC for November, you've got a really big blow up of this area, and you can see all of the contour lines around here. Blown up at this level, it's a better map than pretty much any force commander is going to get. We normally deal with 1 to 20,000 or 1 to 50,000 scale maps. So they do show contour lines, etc., but this is blown up at a really big, nice. This is the kind of map you want to give to the general because it shows every little wadi and canyon, hilltop, and watercourse. Okay, you can see that actually on this map, I've got it sort of half and half, but starting at the north of the Zarabets reservoir, the Russians have likely crossed the river there. It didn't come out on this one because I was getting conflicting reports, but they have reached the Zarabets reservoir. I think they're actually across the river to the north, but that's a bit inane for what we're going to talk about. So you can see that on the western bank, rather the eastern bank of the Zarabets, the Ukrainians are holding on to a pocket that goes from Terny in the north, Yamplovika, and then about 3/4 of the way down to Torsky, which is a eastern suburb of Zarechene. So we talked a little bit before about, not all terrain is equal in terms of its value, and its value measured in a couple of things. Its tactical value, its inherent strength, its inherent weaknesses, but there's also a good sociology members will remember, as sociology majors, there is a sacrifice theory of value. How much is it worth in terms of blood, tears, sweat? So this section on the east bank that Ukraine is holding on to, again, if you zoom in really close, you can see there are a couple of dikes or causeways that go across the reservoir. Those are the sole supply points, ground lines of communication that would allow Ukraine to hold on to the East Bank. Now, do they want to hold on to it? I don't know. Alan and I were talking, before the show. This is the kind of terrain that I would likely give to the enemy because it's not really doing me much good. And the Zarabets reservoir continues to be a significant barrier to Russian advance. So those same two causeways we are talking about now as the lifeline for Ukrainian forces in Terny and Yamplovika, there's no way in a million years that the Russians would ever be able to use those two causeways to advance. It just is never going to happen. They will lose tens of thousands of people trying to get across a one-lane dike. And if you look there at Ivanivka and down to Merne, you can see just how steep those bluffs are, right? What am I looking at? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 contour lines. So that means that the terrain's about like this. So I think it's a good, we'll see what the Ukrainians are doing. They know their own positions. They have defended this territory for the last, good God, Alan, I don't know, 24 months, 36 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but this is a place where we're going to watch. But I say this because this is exactly the kind of terrain. I don't know. I don't want to lose 300 guys holding on to that.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, the Russians have reached the eastern shore of the Zarabets Reservoir before. I don't think they have ever before crossed above the reservoir to the north or south of the reservoir. But it's to me it would look pretty daunting to any Russian on the eastern side of the reservoir here, looking at those hills across the water and realizing they've got to get past them, or through them, and I don't think it's a task that they're capable of.
No, this would mean some really hard fighting, and not just hard fighting, but smart fighting. And if you look at the north end of the Zarabets, those little blue lines there are the symbols for swamp. And you look at the swamp, and then you look, to the northwest, and you see those contour lines, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're going down. There is a little line at the bottom that is a water course, and then those hills go back up. So they would have to cross a swamp and advance down something that is the cross between a narrow valley or a wide canyon, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think that's going to work out for them.
And even though there have been Russian advances here, west of Kremna, east of Liman, it is an area of the Zero line that's relatively stable for the Ukrainians. They might actually have their very best defensive positions here almost than anywhere.
Yeah, there is some serious news. If you zoom in a whole lot on the bottom of the reservoir, you can see the town of Zarechene. You can see Torsky to the east, and I've got a Russian arrow that crosses the Oskil River, and that means the Russians are in contact. They have crossed the bridge, which is the O series 0528. It comes in and does a 90-degree turn. So they are occupying some buildings in Zarechane. Okay, is that bad? Well, I want you to imagine yourself and the four of your compadres who made it to that building, and every bullet, every bean, every band aid you need has got to come through a hail of fire to get to you. But again, this is, we'll see. We just got really good sources that report adequate contacts, and we'll lay them out for you. Good news and bad news, but that is another place that I'll be watching closely.
It seems that the main arena really is down towards Pokrovsk and Kurakova. And again, you can almost look at the Pokrovsk and Kurakova maps together, Chuck. One from 4 November, that's the Pokrovsk map. One from 3 November, that's Kurakova, all the way out to Velika Novosilka. This is where the majority of reported daily engagements are occurring.
This is absolutely the focal point, I think, of the war right now. There's another thing, but as we talk about this map, I encourage everybody go to the live view map right now and pull yourself up, orbital view. Look at the size of the nation of Ukraine. Look at where the Donets River is, or the Dnipro, rather. It is sort of the Mississippi of Ukraine. It comes in from the north, and since time immemorial, the Vikings used to travel down the Dnipro River to get to the Middle East. Russia is never going to get there. I mean, we're talking about battles here for mere meters. They're not going to get the hundreds of kilometers necessary to get to the Dnipro. In truth, Ukraine is not going to be subdued by this Russian army. They don't have it. In that longer post that I put up, I talk about all of the things that are endemic in the Russian army that are bad. The absolute corruption of officers, the erosion of their professionalism, the poor training of Russian soldiers, the fundamental design flaws in all of their armored vehicles. I mean, those things put turrets into orbit every single day. You know what doesn't do that? A Bradley doesn't do that. A Stryker doesn't do that. A Centurion doesn't do that. And an M1 Abrams doesn't do that. M1s have been lost in this war, but I was telling Alan before the show, I have never known of anyone who died in an Abrams tank. It is almost impervious. So do they get disabled? Yeah. Can they be immobilized? Sure, it can happen. Could they catch a shot in their barrel and they no longer have a main gun? Absolutely. But the crews generally live to fight another day. No Russian tanker can say that. Even their T-90 breakthrough tanks, nothing's working for them.
No. And there's nothing like watching those videos of Russian tanks hurling the turrets into the sky. It's pretty much the new Russian space program, If we concentrate first on Kurakova, Chuck, this is where the Ukrainian counterattacks are making a difference, and yet down around Kurakova here, the Ukrainians may also face this decision of what ground do they want to give up, what ground do they want to hold.
Right. We were talking about this pretty much on the last show. The Russians were pushing very hard towards Kurakova, and the The zero line was much closer to the Karakove Reservoir, so that it was this narrow salient that may or may not have been worth defending. But if you are zoomed in on that map right now, I think that is 2200 for November,
Yeah.
you can see all of those contact points, and several of them are 2, 3, and 4 kilometers inside the Russian zero line. And just by the density of those little blue battle icons, you can see that Ukraine is pushing back hard. And some of this has to do with, look, the Russians have expended conservatively 60,000 casualties just in this area of the battlefield. And that number may be much higher. If you also factor in the 10 years it took to take Avdiivka, right? And these major gains, they are a consequence of some Ukrainian mistakes. There's no doubt about it. Every red bit on this map you've seen was not adequately prepared for defense in depth. That was a mistake. However, I'm not sure the Russians are going to get to Pokrovsk this winter. I just don't think so. We see the density of Ukrainian action around Kharkov, but when you look up at Pokrovsk, they are also penetrating the Russian zero line and pushing back. We had a lot of journalists saying, "Look, Pokrovsk is going to paralyze their logistics," and no, if Pokrovsk falls, that will be where the front is. You don't have to supply captured territory. I mean, it's folks. Whenever you're watching CNN or whatever it is, if you see a journalist standing there with a goofy ass helmet on, look around behind him and notice none of the soldiers are wearing theirs. They got their chin strap on. That is your instant credibility meter. That is absolutely tells you so much about what that correspondent knows or does not know, right? So take it with a grain of salt. And there are a lot of sources. For example, General Hodges, who knows a lot more about the military than many of these reporters.
Chuck, have you been surprised by the Russian advance west of Avdiivka and west and north of Vuhledar? Did you expect that the Russian forces would be exhausted and to the point of culmination?
I think they may be approaching culmination now, but I was very surprised and disappointed that after Avdiivka fell, the Russians were able to advance steadily. It wasn't really rapidly. It wasn't by any great offensive moves. In fact, I was going back through, we've got thousands of maps, but I was, going down through and I could see the progress of the Russian forces. And there's another thing that's important in this war. They didn't get this terrain by dint of a three-pronged massive attack that converged and cut off Ukrainian forces and put them in a kettle and annihilated them and moved by leaps and bounds. That is not the way Russia has ever operated in this war. It is this slow, grinding, onward, I don't like to call them meat waves attacks because they're not that large. They're not like the 10,000 North Koreans coming at you in a bayonet charge. It is just constant attacks by assault elements that are generally not sufficient to achieve their objective, that generally lose between 60 and 80% of the assault force, but they just keep coming. And in this area here, frankly, they were aided because the commanding generals in this section did not put the resources into defense in depth. And that was a mistake. These guys have been relieved, and for good reason. Because, there's always something to do if you're a soldier. It is generally dig in, right? You are never going to go wrong by deepening your position. And I'm not even an infantryman. right? But I'll tell you what, you are never going to regret that you are 6 or 8 feet underground when the shit hits the fan.
There were also reports today, Chuck, of additional Russian atrocities on the battlefield from Pokrovsk, executing 3 Ukrainian prisoners of war, so unarmed, surrendered Ukrainian soldiers shot by Russians in cold blood.
We were talking about this before we went on too, and it is outright murder, right? It is as senseless and brutal as walking into a daycare and killing children. It is a war crime. It is premeditated murder. Look, the Russians don't give a damn about the Geneva Convention. I will, I will tell you anyway what the responsibilities are of a belligerent who captures an opponent. You have to feed them. You have to clothe them. You cannot let them die of starvation. You cannot let them freeze to death. You capture someone who has surrendered to you. You're responsible for them. You don't get to shoot them. You don't get to torture them. You don't get to rape them. And I say all these things because this is precisely what the Russians are doing. And one of the reasons that you don't do this is it enters into this cycle of violence, right? You start shooting 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, 100 Ukrainians, and you will find that their well of mercy is going to draw low. But that doesn't mean that you have to stoop to the level of barbarity that is emblematic of Russian forces. It just is that this is what they do. It's what they've done in imperial times. It's what they did in Napoleonic times. It's what they did in the First World War. It's what they did in the Second World War. And surprisingly, it's what they're doing now.
Yeah, it is surprising in a way. I mean, for a soldier to commit such a crime, to kill an unarmed soldier on the battlefield, soldiers have a kind of mutual respect for one another. It is an expression of humanity, recognizing that that opponent of yours, although an enemy, fighting in the same war you're fighting in, has gone through exactly what you have gone through as well. It is an absolutely beastly thing to me and inhuman than to shoot that man in cold blood. And I just think that the Russian psyche that enables the Russian soldiers to do that is terribly warped.
Well, it also shows. Well, there's two things it could show. You could draw the conclusion that Russian troops are ill-disciplined and totally out of control. Or you can draw the conclusion that they have been ordered to do this. That they've got orders, don't come back to headquarters dragging a Ukrainian prisoner. We don't want to see him. And I lean towards the latter explanation. Unfortunately, we have seen the execution of Ukrainian prisoners on the battle line at least once a week. I think it probably happens every day, not just once a week. There are certain units that I look forward to the glorious day when a guy who used to be in the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade. I'm looking forward to that guy going to Cartagena for a nice vacation, and you're going straight to The Hague. Every one of those guys has committed war crimes. The unit that conducted the rape of Bucha. To tell you how warped the Russian system is, that was a nobody unit that went forward, raped, killed, murdered, looted, committed necrophilia. For that, they were made a guards unit. They got promoted and honored by the Russian government. They got their ass kicked in Bucha. They raped and murdered and looted their way out of that town. And for that, Putin made them a guards unit. And I'm happy to say that unit has been annihilated twice. I think it's been reconstituted again, but it's been wiped out twice. So there is this balance there, right? Executing prisoners, you don't win the war. That went out with Genghis Khan, right? He was the last guy who executed prisoners and actually achieved something. It doesn't work in modern warfare. And we've simply seen it. It hardens the resolve of your adversary. So that's why Ukraine doesn't do it. If I can get somebody to put down their rifle and walk over to my side of the line, that's all I want. Economy of force.
And, Ukraine has taken greater and greater numbers of Russian soldiers as prisoners of war. So many after the Kursk offensive that they had to build a new prisoner of war camp to accommodate all the new Russian prisoners, to feed them, to care for them. And we have seen in the prisoner exchanges, of course, the Russians are clearly well taken care of. They are returned to Russia in probably better condition than the day they were taken captive. And we have seen the Ukrainian prisoners of war, some after years of captivity, as if emerging from a Nazi concentration camp.
Absolutely. The SOP for Russians, if they get a Ukrainian prisoner, they don't feed them for 40 days. 40 days. And believe me, a human being can exist without food for 40 days. It is absolutely possible. It's not just possible, your body is built that way. However, it's extraordinarily debilitating. And it isn't just the dynamics of your body. You have psychiatric problems after that period. This is what the Russians pride themselves on. They pride themselves on sending people back who are skeletons. This is what they want to do. And all you need to do is look at one of those exchanges and look at the Russians coming off the bus and look at the Ukrainian soldiers who can barely walk getting off the other bus.
Now, those Russian soldiers all expect to be given leave to return to their hometowns in Russia, but they don't get that. Rather, they are corralled and sent right back to the zero line. But the best thing about those prisoner exchanges, the Ukrainian prisoners coming home. That's the best thing about the prisoner exchanges that we see.
Yeah. We can just pray for those to continue. We don't know the total number of Russian prisoners, but we do know that 38% of Russian vehicles driven into combat are abandoned by their crews. So we know that there almost isn't a single unit in Russia, in Ukraine, operating full strength. They are generally at half strength or even 1/3 or 1/5 strength. And they are being, I don't know, they're being ground down. The 155th's been reconstituted 3 times. They were wiped out in Vuhledar. They were wiped out in their second campaign. And these are naval infantry, right? These are Russian Marines. They're supposed to be, well, Marines, right?
They're supposed to be among the best of the Russian troops. I want to just take one last look at the Pokrovsk map. This is from 4 November 2200 UTC. And I was curious about the little village of Seladovo. Apparently, the Russians have overrun that, but maybe by a little too much. There's the appearance of a Russian salient here, and this is going to give the Ukrainian counterattack here, coming out of Pokrovsk, some some interesting choices to make, I guess.
Yeah, this contact here at Sildova has gone back and forth, and actually the town name I've got it in the wrong position. It should be on the other side, on the south side of the highway. Sometimes when I move the zero line projection, things get moved. I have to check it more closely. But Ukraine, as recently as 10 days ago, was actually conducting raids on the other side of the M30 highway. And they are doing that now. And the salient that Alan is talking about, they're aiming for that little patch of forest there that is tucked into the southeastern turn of the rail line. So it is too soon and too hopeful to pronounce the Russian effort here in Donetsk as culminated, but you can see that the Ukrainian attacks are pushing east of the zero line, and these Russian troops, a lot has been asked of them. And again, I very conservatively would put their losses in the Avdiivka campaign, in the attempt to take Pokrovsk. I'm thinking close to 70,000 Russian casualties. And to put that, look, that is 20,000 more than the United States lost in the totality of a 10-year war in Vietnam. So by no one's estimation is this good fighting, right? This is abysmal. This is squandering Russian manpower and material. And I would also add, to what end? If they take Pokrovsk, so what? It's a lot like taking Bakhmut. It is not a focal point of Ukrainian logistics, right? It is the gateway to Avdiivka, which has already been taken. It's, uh, you know, but again, this is Ukraine electing to fight an attritional battle, right? And I look at these blue arrows a lot, and I see opportunities that Ukraine is not equipped to prosecute, and that's makes me sad. If you've got an enemy that has been pushing on you for months, sustaining hundreds, thousands of casualties a day, 1,200, 1,400, 1,800 casualties a day, they're waiting for the Sunday punch. Those are the kind of troops you blow through like through a goose. But Ukraine can't do it.
Right.
They can't do it. They can't depend on us to give them what they need to prosecute large scale ground maneuver operations against, look, let's call it like it is, a weary adversary. These guys they get beat up every day.
And Ukraine needs more manpower. Ukraine is recruiting another 160,000 soldiers to train and deploy. That will take many, many months to accomplish. And there are, of course, new volunteers for the Ukrainian army every single day. But Ukraine, in addition to facing inadequate supply from the United States and NATO and other allies, does have a manpower shortage in its armed forces, but it's acting to correct it.
This war might be unique in that the average age of a combatant in this war is in their 40s. And I don't think I've ever heard of that in my life. Lieutenant colonels are 40, not privates.
Right.
Sergeant majors are 40, not grunts. And there is a certain physical difference between an 18 or a 20-year-old and a 45-year-old man. So
Yeah, big difference. There are reports from other points on the zero line as well, reports of Russian troops gathering south of Orkiv for a possible assault. Also, reports of Russian forces gathering on across the Dnipro from Kherson. There are only a couple of skirmishes a day right now on the Dnipro south of Kherson. What happens in Kherson every day, of course, is constant Russian artillery barrage and Russian drone operators chasing down pedestrians going to market in Kherson. But that struck me as interesting, this report that Russians would be gathering forces for what would obviously have to be a cross river assault. I just don't see them. I hope they try it. I don't see them carrying it off.
Yeah, I am I share your opinions on that. I urge them to cross the river. That is going to be an absolute fiasco. I'm looking at the larger scale map right now, and I think the first map tomorrow morning is going to be Orkiv, because I see, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 points of Russian contact there. These are towns and villages and highways they fought over before. These are largely these are Russian raiding operations. But again, these operations, these contact points where I see them where they are, these are almost always a Russian force that is not adequate to achieve its objective, getting sent out anyway and getting smashed. Which is why the zero line has pretty much stayed like this, for 2 years. So again, there's, that the element of combat efficiency comes in. I mean, I'm a small unit guy, so for me, morale is everything. You know, I don't have enough guys for any of them to be disaffected, right? I don't have, I'm in a unit so small that a single point of failure can diminish my combat effectiveness. You've got hundreds of Russian soldiers, and they're not in it. They have been through a lot in this war. 400,000 Russian soldiers invaded Ukraine. 700,000 of them are now casualties. So you could literally make the case that everyone who invaded Ukraine now is killed, wounded, or missing. So that has an effect. And I constantly go on about their combat effectiveness. This is it. This is why you see a contact report 5 kilometers into Ukraine across the zero line, and it doesn't stick. Right? They get to whatever the name of the village is, and they look over their shoulder. There's no support. There's nobody coming to get them. And when they run out of ammunition where they are, they're either going to die or they can surrender. And in some cases, in Kursk, they have surrendered 100 guys, people surrendering at one time. So that's not combat effectiveness. That's not leadership. That's not internal cohesion. That isn't morale. And what could be expected, right? Some of those kids were 17 years old. I'm glad they surrendered.
Absolutely. It's the only way they're going to live. And, they should have a life ahead of them and not
Well, right. I don't want to see them die.
no, nor do I. Not the kind of life that's being offered to them by Putin's Russia, but a better life. In addition to looking at action on the zero line every day, Chuck and I take note of the Russian assault on Ukrainian cities, on Ukrainian citizens every single day, on the Ukrainian infrastructure. Kharkiv is often struck by glide bombs, so is Sumy. Grocery markets are struck. We've run through the usual civilian targets so many times: hospitals, schools, grocery markets, town centers, railway stations, etc. So for 60 odd days now, Chuck, Russia has concentrated its air assault with drones, Shahed drones, and glide bombs. It hasn't used any Kinjal missiles for 60 days. So there is a missing part of the air assault that draws attention because it's missing. What are the Russians doing?
Well, I think they're certainly rebuilding their stocks, which is going to be a slow process. And I've got some dated information, but it was surprising to me. And that was so. This was an estimate from UK Defense Intelligence. So in the latter portions of 2023, Russia was assessed to only have 585 missiles capable of attacking targets 500 kilometers or more. That isn't many. Look, if you went into the Yorktown Naval Weapons Station right now, there'd be that many Tomahawks there, and they'd be in Jacksonville, and they'd be at every naval weapons station has got more than that. So, and again, this is dated information, but it's important to grasp where this was. They got about 270 Iskander ballistic missiles. They've got 140 caliber cruise missiles. These are the naval launch variants, and roughly 100 KH-101s, which are their more capable air launch cruise missile, low observable, though I wouldn't say stealthy. And among that 100 includes a bunch of KH-555s and 55s. And the 55s are generally, they are deactivated nuclear cruise missiles that fly with ballast, not explosives, in their nose. So they are essentially expensive air defense decoys. Now, these numbers are absolutely expected to change. This analysis may have been at the absolute low point of Russian supply, but I don't think it was the low point. And 585 missiles for a nation with global strategic commitments, man, that is cutting it pretty close. That is cutting it pretty close. So, one of the hard things for me to wrap my head about, and that was last year, was UK Defense Intelligence saying 95% of Russia's available military power is in Ukraine. And I just found that I couldn't believe it, but they've repeated it over and over again. Look, Putin is rolling all the dice he has for the Ukrainian war. He's betting everything on this war. I don't know.
Well, he's not only betting everything on this war, which is pretty stupid, but he's also bluffing. He has successfully bluffed, especially the National Security Council of President Biden. He's bluffed them into trying to manage escalation, where at this point in the war, 980 plus days into it, there is no escalation that Putin isn't going to use, short of a nuclear weapon. We know he's not going to do that, frankly. But to call in North Korean troops, to conduct the war in the way he's conducted it, to actually launch sabotage and assassination attempts inside Europe itself, and now, Chuck, to attempt to start fires aboard cargo jets flying across the Atlantic to Canada and the United States. Why can't someone in Washington put all this together and see the picture for for the reality it is?
Well, I don't think I'm very far off when I think the people who are in the White House now are literally saying, tomorrow, this isn't my problem. And the two people who are vying for the White House, it's not either one of their problems yet either. But when you've got an attempt to sabotage aircraft flying across the Atlantic, and had this succeeded, you would have a cargo 747 break up in flight. Maybe the crew would report a fire before it happened. The wreckage would hit in mid Atlantic. It would take 6 or 8 months to find it, which is how long it took to find the Air France flight that disappeared between South America and Africa. And by then, the outrage, the incident is so far removed from its discernment that, this would have been a perfect op for the Russians. No one is reacting right now to this. They picked the perfect time to do it. Everyone's talking about the election. I did watch the news tonight, but I will bet that never even got mentioned.
I haven't watched the news tonight either, but I bet it hasn't been mentioned either. And you're right about timing. The perfect time. Absolutely.
And, that look, there's still something of the hippie libertarian in me. And I object to being spoon fed the information my betters think that I deserve. I object to being fed information between commercials for big pharma. This was an important event. I want to hear how it was discovered. I have a professional interest in what did the device look like. But here's another thing I'd say. I can make a lot of devices, and I think I can capable of making ones that probably couldn't be detected. So this tells me a little bit about Russian tradecraft. I don't know how crude or how elegant these devices were, but there deserves to be some pushback here. Kinetic pushback, I would say.
I would say so too. Interesting question. I was asked today by someone who was going to vote. I happened to vote early, but got a phone call from someone who had a long wait in line to cast his vote. And he and I were talking about the war in Ukraine, and he said that he asks himself every day, how does this war end? And I said, Max, I don't think this war does end. I really don't think it ends. You've got to remember the Ukrainians have been fighting for 10 years. And I don't think the Ukrainians are willing to give up fellow Ukrainians in occupied Ukraine in exchange for a ceasefire or a peace that we know Russia would refuse to honor. And so, Chuck, it was today because of this conversation. A guy waiting in line to vote had an hour's wait. Me sitting in a doctor's office, I had an hour's wait too. How does this war end? And it kind of dawned on me. I don't think it does end until we give Ukraine everything it needs to win.
Exactly. And there's another thing that I think, look, the strategic aim of this war, the overarching aim that Ukraine should have as a war aim, of course, you want to capture your own territory that has been unlawfully occupied by, an imperialist expansive power. But Russia's means to wage war, the Russian armed forces have got to be destroyed. They have got to be degraded to the point where Russia can't pull this stuff again against Ukraine, against Lithuania, against Estonia, against Latvia. Russia is going to keep doing this. Now, Putin is not going to live forever, right? He unfortunately is going to live for a while. But this implement he has, this machete, this sledgehammer, this axe that he likes to use on his neighbors, you've got to take that away from him, right? Part of this war is still in this attritional stage right now. Ukraine has to be given what it needs to conduct combined arms maneuver warfare to take back this territory. We've got to give them the anti-aircraft systems that can protect their cities, the anti-aircraft systems that they don't have to protect their ground lines of communication and supply. We've got to give them, we've got to create for them the conditions that the U.S. Army would find necessary. Artillery dominance, air superiority, which is a dream. It's not even going to happen for Ukraine. But, artillery, infantry, superiority at the points of contact. And the most important thing, Jake Sullivan, I know you're not listening, give Ukraine what it needs to conduct ground maneuver warfare and absolutely make sure that when they need something, it's coming. Not that you promised it and the Ukraine and the Norwegians gave it to them, us. Give them what they need. Because it's criminal what they've been doing to Ukraine. It's a joke. It's laughable.
Give them what they need and without restrictions of any kind. After all, it was Ben Hodges early in the war who, during the debate of, what are the appropriate weapons to deliver to Ukraine, General Hodges said, when you've been attacked, every weapon that's given to you is a defensive weapon. That's all you need to know. That kind of clarity cuts right through the confusion that some of these policymakers tend to create.
Yeah. And you're not listening to a couple of gray beards up here talking about it. You're listening to a four-star general. This is a man with a West Point education. This is a man who has dedicated his life to the service of his country and the profession of arms, which actually, folks, is a real profession, right? When you are a military officer in the United States, you want to make major, you get a master's degree. You want to make admiral or general, you got a PhD. You keep studying, you keep writing. These are the things that are expected of American military officers, even frogmen, right? Even us. So he's a fine example of a great leader and a great general.
He is a fine example and a real protector of democracy, by the way. He's made some great statements about American democracy leading up to today, election day. And he takes action when he tells you what his opinion is. That's why I wish he became gets some kind of high position in the next administration, if it's not a Trump administration. If who knows what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow or over the next week. But if you support Ukraine, there is a better chance that you can persuade Vice President Harris to do the right thing than there is to persuade Donald Trump to do the right thing.
Well, I would settle on this. You've got Jake Sullivan who went to Georgetown, or you've got a four-star general who commanded NATO forces in Europe. And I don't want to sound like the warmongering pig I am, but my money is on someone like General Hodges, someone like Colin Powell, someone who maybe has seen a bit of the real world and maybe would make some better decisions.
I think so. Well, Chuck and I are probably going to tune into the news now. We haven't had a chance to do that yet today, Election Day, November 5th here in the United States. And this coming week, Chuck is going to add some key maps to the atlas of maps that Chuck has created throughout this war. I would love to get some of these maps together, Chuck, and animate them over time. I can't do that kind of thing with technology, but we must know someone who can do it, right?
Well, I've got them all, and I think it's probably in excess of 3,000 maps by
Wow.
now. But just little bit at a time, a little bit every day, and but they're not going to waste. I mean, I've sent some to the U.S. Army. They've asked for some, and so but we'll see. We just want to help you, everyone who's listening. Look, we want to help you win your information fight in your information microcosm. We want you to dominate. When people say this isn't our war, ask them if they remember when there had to be 150,000 U.S. troops in Germany. Was that good? Because if Ukraine falls, we're going to go right back to the absolute depths of the Cold War. So we're in it to win it. And Alan and I are going to be there until the war is over, and then we're going to do a reconstruction show.
That's right. And at some point, Chuck and I are going to report to you from Ukraine itself.
Absolutely. We're going, folks. I promise you we're doing it.
It's not going to happen before Christmas, but
it is.
But it could happen before Easter. I don't know. We'll see.
We'll be doing.
Chances are, when it happens, Chuck, it'll be a surprise to everyone, including you and me.
Absolutely. But thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thank you. Please subscribe, follow us, like us on the Information Warfare Initiative here on YouTube. Share the word. This is bullet points made for video. As I like to say, Chuck and I brought our radio faces to video. What were we thinking? But we'll be here throughout this week with new maps and new discussions. I'm going to assign myself a little homework right now. When did the Russians give up the first war, the first Chechen war, and what made them give up? Because I just feel that Russia, quite possibly, as hard a winter as Ukraine is going to have, the Russian soldiers are going to have possibly a harder winter. Maybe they will reach their end point in January or February or March. I don't know. I don't know what their end point was in the first Chechen war, but that's my assignment tonight, because I need to know more about what Ukraine is up against.
Well, General Winter is on the side of Ukraine. So we know that Russian troops are ill-supplied, ill-equipped, badly led. You've got officers who send hundreds of their men to their death every day, and these aren't the kind of officers who are going to deliver dry clothes and warm food to their men at the front, and they're going to die. So we look forward to that, and
we do. This has been Indications and Warnings with Chuck Farrer on day 986 of Russia's full-scale genocidal invasion of Ukraine. It is November 5th, 2024. Chuck, Slava Ukraini.
Roem Slava, my brother. Good night, everybody. Thank you.